Somewhere in a private garage in New Zealand, behind a locked door, sits one of the last surviving examples of a motorcycle that the industry tried to erase from history. Only 10 were ever built, each one assembled by hand in a workshop in Christchurch. This bike held a world speed record, won races against factory teams with $100 million budgets, and pioneered technology 20 years ahead of its time. But that bike is only part of the story. The motorcycle industry has been quietly killing its most extraordinary machines for over 50 years. This is the story of the motorcycles they tried to destroy, and the people who refused to let them die. To understand why certain bikes get erased, you need to understand a simple truth about the motorcycle industry. It does not reward innovation. It punishes it. Not openly, not publicly, but through a web of unwritten rules, regulatory pressure, and gentlemen's agreements that have shaped every sport bike you can buy today. And the clearest example of that punishment happened on a British racetrack in 1994. Norton motorcycles had been a legendary name in British racing for decades. By the late 1980s, the company was struggling financially. Their salvation came from an unlikely source. Engineer David Garside had spent years developing a twin-rotor Wankel engine, a completely different approach to making power. Instead of pistons going up and down, the Wankel uses a spinning triangular rotor inside a figure-8 chamber. It produces incredibly smooth power delivery, and it runs at extremely high temperatures. The exhaust on a Norton rotary hits 927 degrees Celsius, hot enough to glow orange in the dark. Norton actually managed to sell a few rotary road bikes. The Norton Classic was limited to exactly 100 units in 1987. The Norton F1 sport bike followed with about 150 units, producing 94 horsepower at 9,500 revolutions per minute with a top speed above 145 miles per hour. These were exotic, expensive, and deeply weird machines. But it was the racing version that caused the real trouble. The Norton Rotary started winning everything. In 1989, Norton won the British Formula One Championship and the 750 cubic centimeter Super Cup. Then in 1992, rider Steve Hislop took the rotary Norton to the Isle of Man and won the Senior TT at a record speed of 121 miles per hour. That was Norton's first Senior TT victory since 1961. The rotary engine was putting out 135 horsepower from just 588 cubic centimeters, and engineer Brian Crichton kept finding more. By 1994, rider Ian Simpson won the entire British Superbike Championship on a Crichton Norton. The Japanese factories were furious. Honda rider Terry Reimer publicly complained about the Nortons passing him and spitting flames. Rival teams had lobbied for years against what they saw as the rotary's unfair advantage. So what happened next? The competitors did not build better bikes, they changed the rules. After the 1994 season, British superbike racing shifted to production-based homologation requirements under the MCRCB. Norton, which had collapsed financially after its sale to Wildrose Ventures in 1993, had no hope of meeting minimum production numbers. The rotary was effectively pushed out of top-level British racing, not by a single decree, but by rules it could never satisfy. Norton itself went bankrupt with £7 million in debt. Brian Crichton kept developing the rotary on his own, and his CR700P reportedly makes 200 horsepower today. The surviving Norton F1 road bikes now sell for over £50,000. But thanks to those rule changes, the rotary will never compete in a British championship again. And that ban was just the beginning. 5 years later, the entire motorcycle industry agreed to something even more audacious. They agreed to make every sport bike in the world slower, on purpose. And they did it in secret. In the late 1990s, the Japanese manufacturers were locked in a speed war that was getting dangerous. Kawasaki's ZZR 1100 held the top speed crown at 176 miles per hour. Honda's Super Blackbird took it in 1996 at 179 miles per hour. Then, in 1999, Suzuki dropped a bomb called the Hayabusa. The name means peregrine falcon in Japanese. Suzuki chose it because falcons prey on blackbirds. That was a direct taunt at Honda, and the bike backed it up. The Hayabusa hit 194 miles per hour in independent testing, making it the fastest production motorcycle ever built. Kawasaki was developing the ZX-12R to go even faster. Rumors said it would break 200 miles per hour. European politicians, especially in France and Germany, started threatening to ban high-performance Japanese imports altogether. That is when, according to contemporary reporting by Cycle World journalist David Edwards, BMW Motorrad officials traveled to Japan and proposed a voluntary speed cap. A subsequent meeting in Bologna between Japanese and European manufacturers formalized what became known as the Gentleman's Agreement. Every production motorcycle would be electronically limited to 300 kilometers per hour, that is 186 miles per hour. No written contract, no public announcement, just an understanding that would reshape the entire industry. No manufacturer has ever officially confirmed these details on the record, but Cycle World's account remains the definitive source. The Kawasaki ZX-12R was the agreement's first victim. Despite having more horsepower than the Hayabusa, Kawasaki canceled its world press launch while engineers installed new speed-limited ECUs. False rumors were deliberately spread, claiming the bike was aerodynamically unstable at high speeds. Kawasaki USA later admitted to Cycle World magazine that the bike had been intentionally restricted. Riders who had tested unrestricted prototypes said the bike was perfectly stable. The instability story was a cover. Here is the wildest part. That agreement still largely holds today. Every major Japanese sport bike produced in the last 25 years tops out at exactly 299 to 300 kilometers per hour. There is no signed document, there is no public agreement. But the pattern is unmistakable. While almost every manufacturer, Italian companies have openly defied it. MV Agusta released the F4 R312 in 2007 and put the top speed right in the model name. And in the ultimate irony, BMW's own S1000RR has been independently tested at 188 miles per hour. The company that reportedly brokered the speed limit broke its own deal. If you want to own an unrestricted Hayabusa from 1999, you can spot one by its 220 mile/hour speedometer. Later models only go to 186. Those unrestricted first-year bikes are now collector's items. The fastest production motorcycle of the 20th century, frozen in time because the industry decided speed was bad for business. But banning bikes from racing and secretly limiting their speed is one thing. What happened to two other motorcycles was something else entirely. Their own manufacturers tried to make them disappear. The Suzuki RE5 was supposed to be the future. In the early 1970s, Suzuki licensed Wankel rotary technology and built a motorcycle around it. They hired Italian designer Giorgetto Giugiaro to style it. They got astronaut Edgar Mitchell from Apollo 14 to endorse it. The 497 cubic centimeter single rotor engine was silky smooth and futuristic, but it weighed 573 pounds, got terrible gas mileage during the 1973 oil crisis, and ran so hot that the exhaust pipes needed double-wall cooling. Dealers had no idea how to service it. Suzuki offered a full engine replacement warranty and eventually had to set up a dedicated factory rebuild facility just for RE5 engines. Combined with research and development costs, NSU licensing fees, and sales of only about 6,000 units, the RE5 program was a major financial loss. Persistent legends claim Suzuki dumped unsold bikes into the ocean, though the company has never confirmed that. What is confirmed is that Suzuki killed a ready-to-produce twin-rotor prototype and abandoned rotary development completely. The failure added to a difficult mid-1970s period for Suzuki, which was simultaneously struggling with emissions compliance across its automobile line. The company's pivot to four-stroke motorcycles with the GS750 and GS400 helped chart a new course. And then there was the Bimota V-Do 500. If the RE5 was a corporate disaster, the V-Do was something closer to a tragedy. The Bimota V-Do 500 was supposed to save the two-stroke engine. Italian engineer Pierluigi Marconi spent 8 years designing a 499 cubic centimeter V-twin two-stroke with direct fuel injection. The injection system sprayed fuel directly into the combustion chamber after the exhaust port closed, which meant unburned fuel could not escape. The prototypes used Ferrari fuel injectors. On paper, this bike was going to prove that two-strokes could meet emission standards and survive. Then Bimota rushed it to market in 1997 at a price tag of roughly $30,000, and everything fell apart. The Ferrari injectors were not available in production quantities. Crankshaft seals leaked, pistons seized, The electronics failed. These $30,000 motorcycles barely functioned. Bimota recalled the first 150 to 185 units, depending on which source you trust, and bought them all back at the company's own expense. They attempted a fix called the Evoluzione, which replaced the revolutionary fuel injection with conventional Dell'Orto carburetors. Think about that for a second. They removed the entire reason the bike existed. Of approximately 388 V-Dos ultimately produced across all variants, far short of the planned 500, Bimota filed for bankruptcy in 2000. The bikes were headed for destruction. But one engineer refused to let that happen. Piero Caroni purchased every recalled bike, every spare part, every patent, every mold, and every technical document from the bankruptcy receivership. Between 2001 and 2005, he rebuilt bikes with working carburetors and proper seals. He completed 141 Evoluzione models and 30 track-only Edizione Finale bikes. Only around 185 of the original fuel-injected V-Dos were ever built, and fewer than 100 survive in that form today. Every single one of them exists because one person decided they were worth saving. And that brings us to the motorcycle that started this whole story, the one in the locked garage, the one you probably have never heard of, the Britten V1000. John Britten was born in 1950 in Christchurch, New Zealand. He was dyslexic and self-taught. He restored a 1927 Indian Scout when he was just 13 years old. His heroes were New Zealand engineers who defied the establishment, Burt Munro, Bruce McLaren, and Richard Pearce. People who built things in sheds and changed the world. By the late 1980s, Britten was building his own motorcycle from absolute scratch, not modifying an existing bike. He built every single component from the ground up, including the engine itself, in a small workshop behind his house. The specifications still sound impossible. It had a 998 cubic centimeters water-cooled V-twin, producing 166 horsepower, wrapped in a carbon and Kevlar composite chassis that weighed just 138 kilograms wet. For context, a Ducati 916 from the same era weighed about 195 kilograms. The Britten was lighter than bikes with half its power. The bike had no conventional frame at all. The engine itself was the frame, serving as a fully stressed structural member. Titanium connecting rods, carbon fiber wheels, a radiator mounted under the seat for better aerodynamics, a double wishbone front suspension with adjustable rake and trail, a layout that would not appear on production bikes for decades, and one of motorcycling's first programmable engine management systems with laptop data logging built in a garage in New Zealand in the early 1990s. In 1991, the Britten showed up at Daytona's Battle of the Twins and finished second and third against factory-backed teams from Ducati and other major manufacturers. Nobody knew what to make of this bike with no visible frame, built by a guy from Christchurch who nobody in the paddock had ever heard of. By 1992, it was winning at Assen in the Netherlands. Rider Andrew Stroud won the Battle of the Twins at Daytona 4 times on a Britten, beating teams with budgets 1,000 times larger. On December 4, 1993, rider John White took a Britten V1000 to the Christchurch runway and set the FIM flying mile world record for motorcycles under 1,000 cubic centimeters at 188 miles per hour. That record has never been broken. It has stood for over 30 years. A garage-built motorcycle from New Zealand holds a world speed record that no factory on Earth has been able to beat. If you are watching this and finding these stories as wild as I think they are, consider subscribing. I cover stories like this regularly, and the next one is just as crazy. The Britten V1000 was never suppressed by a corporate conspiracy. The truth is sadder than that. The bike was ineligible for production-based racing series like World Superbike because it was not a production bike. Britten had plans for a production motorcycle through a deal with Indian Motorcycle Company, but Indian went into liquidation. In mid-1995, John Britten was diagnosed with inoperable malignant melanoma. He died on September 5, 1995. He was 45 years old. Over 1,000 mourners filled Christchurch Cathedral. Thousands more stood in the square outside listening on loudspeakers. Andrew Stroud led the funeral procession riding a V1000. Britten's team completed the remaining bikes exactly as he had wished. Exactly 10 V1000s exist. Their locations read like a treasure map. Number 2 sits in the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa in Wellington, where it is one of the most visited exhibits. Number 7 lives at the Barber Vintage Motorcycle Museum in Alabama. Number 6, owned by Kevin Grant in Auckland, is the best-known running example and is still used for public track demonstrations around the world. At least 2 or 3 others remain operational, including the Barber Museum's machine and one rebuilt by American collector Bob Robbins. In 2015, 4 Brittens were ridden simultaneously on the Barber Motorsports Park circuit. The others are in private collections across the United States, Italy, and the Netherlands. One was listed at $249,000 plus $50,000 in spare parts. None has ever appeared at public auction. The Britten was not the only motorcycle too advanced for its time. Honda spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing oval pistons because founder Soichiro Honda personally hated 2-stroke engines and compared them to bamboo contraptions. The Honda NR500 Racer, designed by Shoichiro Irimajiri with a team that included future Honda president Takeo Fukui, was humiliated at its 1979 debut when both riders retired and officials physically removed the bikes from the grid. It never scored a single world championship point. But Honda recycled the technology into the NR750 road bike, a $50,000 V4 with 32 valves, 8 titanium connecting rods, and over 200 patents on the engine alone. Only 322 were built, not the commonly cited 300. The FIM later added an explicit rule banning oval pistons from Grand Prix racing, with a 2007 clarification requiring piston diameter measurements within 5% of each other at any 2 points. The irony is that the ban was preventive. Honda's oval piston racer never won a single Grand Prix. They closed the loophole anyway, just in case someone got it right. Today, clean NR750s sell for over $125,000 at auction. And then there are the 2-strokes, an entire category of motorcycle engine that was systematically pushed out of existence. The 1985 Yamaha RZ350 was the last significant road-legal 2-stroke sport bike sold in America. It was actually the first motorcycle ever equipped with a catalytic converter, a desperate engineering workaround for tightening emission standards. Even with the catalytic converter, the RZ350 could not meet California's standards, which included a corporate emissions averaging system. It was never sold at California Yamaha dealers. Yamaha discontinued it from the US market after 1985 because keeping a street-legal 2-stroke compliant had become commercially impractical. The Yamaha RD500LC was even more extreme. A 499 cubic centimeter V4 2-stroke derived directly from Kenny Roberts' Grand Prix racer, producing 88 horsepower. It was never sold in the United States at all. Only about 6,500 were ever built worldwide. The Aprilia RS250 survived in Europe until 2004 as the last fire-breathing 2-stroke sport bike you could buy. Before the 2-strokes were regulated away, one of them earned a reputation so terrifying it changed the entire industry. The Kawasaki H2 750 Mach YV from 1972 was the fastest production motorcycle of its era, a 748 cubic centimeter 2-stroke triple putting out 74 horsepower and running the quarter mile in a flat 12 seconds. Riders called it the Widowmaker because the power was completely dormant until about 5,000 RPM, then hit like a freight train with horsepower and torque peaking within just 300 RPM of each other. The frame flexed at speed and caused violent oscillation above 100 miles per hour. The H2 was never formally banned, but its high accident rate contributed to rising insurance premiums for Kawasaki's 2-stroke triples, making ownership increasingly expensive and intimidating in many markets. That is a pattern that continues to this day. In urban London postcodes right now, many insurers refuse to cover sport bikes entirely. The industry does not always need legislation to kill a motorcycle. Sometimes rising insurance premiums do the job just fine. 2-strokes were not explicitly banned by law. The emission standards are technically engine neutral, but the limits became so strict that meeting them with a 2-stroke requires exotic technology nobody has been able to make work reliably. The Bimota V2 proved that. The Canadian motorcycle media outlet Fort9 pointed out something uncomfortable. 2-strokes cost less to manufacture, have fewer parts, and can be rebuilt by amateurs in their own garages. That makes them financially unattractive to manufacturers who profit from expensive dealer service networks. Emissions regulations may have killed the 2-stroke, but the industry had every financial reason to let it die. So where does that leave us? The Norton rotary was regulated out of top-level competition after it proved it could win. The Hayabusa and ZX-12R were secretly neutered through a corporate handshake. The Bimota V2 was recalled and nearly destroyed. Two-stroke sport bikes were regulated out of existence. And the Britten V1000, the most extraordinary motorcycle ever built by hand, ended not because of industry suppression, but because its creator ran out of time. The motorcycle industry did not crush these bikes the way General Motors crushed the EV1. There is no documented case of a major manufacturer ordering the systematic destruction of production motorcycles. What happened instead was quieter and arguably more effective. Speed limits imposed through backroom agreements, rule changes that conveniently excluded winning technologies, emission standards that favored the profitable four-stroke machines manufacturers preferred to sell anyway. The bikes were not erased, they were contained, because the machines were so extraordinary that the industry had to change its own rules just to keep up. And somewhere right now, in private garages and museum collections and locked workshops around the world, those 10 Brittens, those surviving Norton rotaries, those unrestricted first-year Hayabusas with the 220 miles per hour speedometer, and those rescued Bimota V2s still exist. Collectors pay $250,000 for a Britten that will never come up for public auction. They pay over $100,000 for a Honda NR750 with oval pistons that no racing organization will ever allow on a grid again. They pay £50,000 for a Norton F1 with an engine that was too good for the rulebook. These are not just motorcycles, they are proof that the best ideas do not always win. Sometimes they just survive, and sometimes surviving is enough.